Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time to talk to you about life, God, and how the two come together. Right now, in this segment, we're talking about the judgment of God upon sin, and specifically upon the United States of America. I have made the point in a previous audio file that we are experiencing God's judgment. God is not just simply allowing the United States of America to come unglued on every area of its life. He's causing it. And that's a shocking statement until you read what the Apostle Paul had to say in the book of Romans. Romans is a book that Paul wrote to explain Christian doctrine, the doctrine of soteriology. It's a lengthy epistle, one of the longest that he wrote. But it makes the point in the first few chapters that human beings are sinners. He goes on from there to look at Israel in chapters 9 through 11, pointing to the fact that God had made a covenant with Abraham, and he has not forsaken his covenant people. The promises that God made to Abram are still in effect. They're on hold, but they will be fulfilled. And why? And then he turns his attention in chapter 12 to the end of the book to the application for those of us who are saved, how to apply those doctrines. In making his initial point, he says that all men are sinners before a holy God. When they knew God, he says, they glorified him not as God. Now this applies to Adam and Eve, but it applies to every single person who's ever been born on this planet. They knew that he was God. They ignored him. They disobeyed him. They worked against him. One of the ways God reveals himself is from within our own being. Chapter 1, verse 19. He says that the knowledge of God is manifest in us. We don't need somebody outside telling us there's a God. We already know that. That's why we have so many anti-Bible people. They worship all sorts of things. We know there's a God. We want him to be nature, or we want him to be the devil, or almost anything. We don't want him to be an absolute, holy, immutable God. God has also revealed himself through creation. Verse 20 says that God is clearly seen by the things that are made. Things like his eternal power, his eternal Godhead. So much so that no human being has an excuse for not believing that there is a God and that he is eternal and that he is all-powerful. No excuse. Now, unbelievers disagree. But what is the normal result? You have a child born to your family. This child comes into this world as a sweet, lovable, obedient, patient, kind creature. Has to be taught to do evil. No, it's just the opposite. They come in selfish. They want to eat. They're going to scream till you give it to them. Well, that's natural. But later on, they're going to take something away from their friend because they just want it. They're not going to want it until the other guy gets it, but then he gets it, he's going to want it. It's called the code of the 2-year-old. Everybody goes through it. Paul says we refuse to glorify God. And we are ungrateful. We are unthankful. And the result is the heart becomes vain, morally wicked, foolishly so, idolatrously so. And who do we blame for that? We can't blame God. So we get creative. In the Bible, there's a word, imagination. It's not a good word. When it's used, it's evil. Imagination is what human beings think of, create in their own mind. It's not objective data. It's not universal truism. It's whatever they think. And the Bible says our now foolish heart becomes darkened because of that imagination. Things become even less clear, less obvious. In chapter 1, verse 22, he says we become fools. We become less wise than even we were before. And we begin to worship the creation rather than the Creator. And when that happens, what does God do? Verse 24, God gives us up. He is relaxing his divine restraint. This is a phrase Paul's going to use 3 times in this passage. And each time it's going to say exactly the same thing. God has in his power the ability to keep us from running amok. But we don't want to listen to God. And if we push it, God will give us up or over to the thing that we want the most. Initially, what is it talking about? Verse 24, 25. Uncleanness, moral impurity. I don't want to stay morally pure. Okay. God will give you up to uncleanness. He says that they might dishonor their bodies between themselves. We're talking sexual. Won't honor God. Won't exalt him. Want to exalt myself over God. So now I degrade myself. The evolutionist says the human being is the highest creature on the planet. God says, I am. There's a fight. What happens? At some point, God gives this atheist, this person who doesn't believe in God, the freedom to do what is naturally in his imagination and his mind to do, which is degrade the very body that he has exalted, to worship and serve what has actually been created, rather than to worship and serve the one who did the creating. And having changed the truth of God into a lie, Paul says, we begin to worship, to venerate, to adore, and to serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever and ever. But doing this has its own reward. Verse 26 says that reward is vile affections. People who indulge in disgraceful and disgusting, shameful, physical passions are doing so because they have refused to recognize God. We blame it on a lot of things. We blame it on our humanity. We blame it on our circumstances. We blame it on the chemistry in our body. We can blame it on 17 things. God says it's because we have refused to recognize him. We see it in the news, and we shake our head. People going out and shooting people in churches for no reason except their own desire. Never once realizing that could be me. That could be you. Because that's a person who has gone down this path, rejecting God, until finally they reach this horrible place. The Bible argues against all of sin that you can think of. Our parents are here to teach us what's right and wrong. We have churches. We have schools. But all of these have become corrupted. They're trying to destroy the nuclear family. God isn't trying to do that. Everything we need, everything that is right and good, God has shown us and provided for us, and we have rejected it. In this second phase, this second giving over or giving up, we see all of the sexual sins of our culture. Leaving, verse 26 says, the natural use, burning in their lust toward one another, working what is unseemly, receiving in themselves the just recompense of their error. A recompense, the Bible says, that was just and needful and necessary. But there's still another one coming. Verse 28, continual rejection of God and his righteousness brings a reprobate mind. That word means worthless, cast away, useless where right and wrong, good and evil, decent and indecent, honest and dishonest are concerned. And why? Well, because they refuse to consider. They refuse to hold thoughts of God in their heart. Verse 29, they are filled now with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, etc. The attitudes, the conditions, the actions are recorded in verse 24, all because God gave them over to what they wanted instead of him. And in verse 32, the Bible makes it clear they know it. They know what they're doing is wrong, and they know that God must judge it. Now, some of these people, not all of these people are doing everything there is that's wrong, but they have pleasure in them that do them. They're happy that these people are doing this stuff, in part because it justifies what they're doing. I'm not as bad as she is. In part because they just hate God. Goodness, morality, justice, decency, they hate it all. And they hate it so much, they would rather see it go away. Why? Because they hate the author. They don't want to live up to that holy standard themselves. They want others to be worse than them so they can feel good about themselves. We see it in the demonstrations that people have for abortion, the killing of a human life. 2.5 babies are murdered that way every minute in this world. But we're up in arms over Cecil the lion. Homosexuality. It used to be 90% of the people were against it. Now, 60% of the people are for it. Oh, they don't want to do it. But they want you to have the right to do it. In the 60s, it was free love. In the 70s, it was free contraceptives. Today, it's all things immoral and disgusting. We see it with the demonstrations around the world and throughout our country against God, against Christianity, against decency, morality, and order. And God has placed a large sign over this entire generation. It has one word: Ichabod. The glory has left. God has removed his mercy.